There are photographs taken on March 1st, 1960, at a German airport. A young girl in a dark coat, barely 15 years old, standing on the tarmac in the cold morning air, waving goodbye to the most famous man on earth. She is smiling, but if you look closely, and most people never do, you can see that her eyes are not smiling at all. They are holding something back, something vast and unspeakable for a girl her age. And the question that photograph raises, 65 years later, is a simple one. What does it cost to love someone the whole world already owns? What do you give up when you give yourself over to a legend before you have even had the chance to become yourself? And when that legend is gone, first through divorce, then through death, then through the slow erosion of grief upon grief upon grief, what is left of the woman who waited, who endured, who built an empire from the ruins of a love story the whole world romanticized while only she knew its private weight? This is not the story of Elvis Presley. This is the story of the girl in the dark coat at the airport. The girl nobody asked about. The woman who outlived everyone she ever loved. The woman who stood smiling, always smiling, while the cost of her extraordinary life accumulated, quietly, behind her eyes. Her name is Priscilla, and this is the truth of what that name has meant to carry. She was born in Brooklyn, New York, on May 24th, 1945, into a world still raw from war, to a mother named and a Navy pilot father named James Wagner, a young man full of promise who never came home. James Wagner died in a plane crash when Priscilla was just 6 months old. 6 months. She never knew the weight of his hand, never heard him say her name. And yet that absence, that foundational, pre-conscious loss, would shape the architecture of everything that came after. It installed in her, before she could walk or talk or understand a single thing about the world, a quiet hunger for someone who would stay, someone who would choose her, someone who would not disappear. Her mother, and eventually remarried. The new man was Air Force Captain Paul Beaulieu, a steady, disciplined military man who gave Priscilla his name and raised her as his own. She became Priscilla Beaulieu. The family grew. 5 younger half-siblings arrived, and with them came the defining rhythm of military life. Pack up, move out, start over. Fort Worth, Austin, Del Valle. The family moved wherever the Air Force sent them, and Priscilla learned early to be adaptable, to make friends quickly because you would be leaving soon, to not invest too deeply in any particular place. She was a child of perpetual transition. Pretty, quiet, observant. A girl who dreamed, she would later admit, of becoming an actress, who pressed her face against movie screens and imagined another life. Then, in 1959, the orders came down, Germany, Wiesbaden. The family would uproot again, cross an ocean, and land in Cold War West Germany. 14-year-old Priscilla was not happy about it. She had just built a life in Texas. She had friends, routines, the ordinary beautiful things of adolescence. And now it was all being packed into boxes again. She boarded the plane to Wiesbaden not knowing that her entire future, every joy, every wound, every triumph, every grief, was waiting for her there, in a spa town called Bad Nauheim, 40 minutes from the base. She would not come home the same girl. At the Eagles Club on the Wiesbaden base, teenagers gathered the way teenagers always do, around food and music and the low-voltage electricity of figuring out who you are. Priscilla would sit by the jukebox and write letters to the friends she'd left behind in Texas. She was, by all accounts, a striking girl. Blue eyes, dark hair, a face that turned heads without trying. One afternoon, a man named Curry Grant approached her. He asked a casual question that would detonate like a quiet bomb in the middle of her life. He said, "How would you like to meet Elvis Presley?" It was September 13th, 1959. She wore a white and navy sailor dress. She was nervous. She didn't speak much on the 40-minute drive from Wiesbaden to Bad Nauheim, to the house where the most famous young man in the world was sitting out his army service with studied patience. And when she walked through the door and Elvis Presley turned and looked at her, this 14-year-old girl in her sailor dress, her eyes wide and uncertain, something shifted in the room. He played songs for her. He played Are You Lonesome Tonight? He looked at her the way no one had ever looked at her before, like she was the only thing in the room. She walked out that night thinking she would probably never see him again. She was wrong. What came next was not a fairy tale, though the world would always insist on calling it one. What came next was a relationship that began with an imbalance so profound that it would take decades for Priscilla herself to fully name it. Elvis was 24. She was 14. He had already conquered America, had already sold millions of records, had already made Ed Sullivan cut the camera to his face because his hips were too dangerous for television. He was a man of the world, complicated, charismatic, mourning his recently deceased mother Gladys with a grief so total it had carved him hollow. And he saw in this quiet, dark-haired girl something that soothed the rawness in him. Some people who knew him said she reminded him of his mother, that her stillness, her eyes, the way she sat and listened, recalled the woman he had loved most in his life and lost. Priscilla did not know any of that then. She only knew that he chose her. And after a lifetime of watching people leave, her biological father before she could remember, her friends every time the orders came, being chosen felt like the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to her. When Elvis was discharged from the Army on March 1st, 1960, and the transport plane carried him back to America, Priscilla stood on the tarmac at Rhine-Main Airport in a dark coat and waved until the plane was gone. She was 15 years old. Press photographers captured her there, that waving figure in the cold German morning, and some of those pictures ended up in Life magazine. The world saw a sweet story. Nobody asked what it cost her to stand there, smiling, watching the only person who had chosen her disappear into the sky. When Elvis was gone, she isolated herself for 2 full days. She could not eat. She could not sleep. She was certain it was over, that she had been a temporary warmth, a comfort for a lonely soldier, and nothing more. Then, 21 days after the plane left, the phone rang in the early hours of the morning. His voice filled the dark, and whatever small, fragile self-preservation she had built in those 2 days of silence dissolved completely. This is where the wound lived. Not in any single dramatic moment, but in this, the long years of waiting, of being chosen and then held at a distance, of loving from thousands of miles away while the man she loved toured and filmed movies and was surrounded, constantly, by glamorous women who were not 14 years old in sailor dresses from Texas. She read about his rumored romance with Margaret during the filming of Viva Las Vegas. She read the celebrity gossip columns. She heard about girls throwing their room keys onto the stage. She would write in her memoir that her anxiety deepened, that she rarely saw him, that the obsessing became a low-grade, constant fever in her daily life. And she was still a teenager. She was supposed to be learning algebra. She was supposed to be going to dances and passing notes in class and figuring out, in the slow, ordinary way of adolescence, who she was. Instead, she was learning a different lesson, that love requires sacrifice, that to be with someone extraordinary, you must arrange yourself around their extraordinariness, that your own shape does not particularly matter so long as you are useful to theirs. In March 1963, after years of phone calls and letters and brief, intoxicating visits, Elvis proposed an arrangement to her parents. He wanted Priscilla to come to Memphis, to finish high school there, at Immaculate Conception Cathedral School, an all-girls Catholic institution. Her parents agreed, with strict conditions. Elvis agreed to every one of them. Captain Beaulieu flew his 17-year-old daughter across the ocean and handed her, with cautious trust, into the orbit of the most famous entertainer in the world. She enrolled at Immaculate Conception in the spring of 1963. She was supposed to live with Elvis's father Vernon and his wife. Instead, she gradually migrated to Graceland, spending more and more time at the mansion, among Elvis's grandmother Minnie May and the shifting, endless entourage of Memphis Mafia men who surrounded the king at all hours. It was not the life of a teenager. It was not the life of anyone ordinary. Graceland was an 18-room mansion with a swimming pool and a jungle room and horses grazing in the pasture. And it was also, in its way, a kind of beautiful prison. A gilded enclosure where the rules were Elvis's rules, and the hours were Elvis's hours, and the woman you were being shaped into was, above all, the woman Elvis wanted you to be. He chose her clothes, her hair, her makeup. He taught her to line her eyes heavily, to tease her hair high, to achieve a look that was not entirely her own, but which became so associated with her that the world mistook it for who she was. She has said since that she went along with it at first because she trusted him, because she admired his taste, because she was 17 years old, and it felt like love to be so thoroughly seen. And it was love. She has always insisted on that. What they had was genuine and rare. But it was also a love that had a shape built into it, and the shape was his. They married on May 1st, 1967, at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. Priscilla was 21. The photographs from that day are iconic. Her hair stacked impossibly high, her face radiant and slightly unreal, Elvis beside her in a tuxedo. 9 months later, on February 1st, 1968, their daughter was born. Lisa Marie Presley entered the world at Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis, and for a brief and luminous time, everything seemed not just possible, but actually, genuinely whole. Then the world shifted. Because after Lisa Marie was born, something changed in Elvis. He had wanted the child, had been present and tender in the early weeks of fatherhood. But the physical intimacy between him and Priscilla faded. He had, she would later write with heartbreaking honesty, a deep psychological resistance to seeing the woman he desired and the mother of his child as the same person. He loved Priscilla. He placed her on a pedestal. And pedestals, as any woman who has stood on one knows, are not places you can live. They are cold. They are narrow. They are profoundly, utterly lonely. She was 22 years old, alone in Graceland with a baby while her husband was on the road with thousands of women screaming his name. She had no career, no independent income, no life outside of him. And the rumors, the persistent, aching rumors, kept coming. Girls on tour, female co-stars, the revolving satellite of women who circled his gravity. She confronted him. He dismissed every story. She tried to believe him. She lined her eyes and teased her hair and smiled at cameras and performed the role of the happy, devoted wife with a professionalism that nobody recognized as performance because she was not trying to deceive anyone. She was simply trying to survive. Then she began taking karate lessons. This detail matters. It sounds small, but it is not. In 1972, in her late 20s, starved for independence and some sense of herself beyond the marble halls of Graceland, Priscilla began studying karate with an instructor named Mike Stone. And something extraordinary happened. She got good. She got better than good. She discovered that she had strength she had not known existed. And she began to see, for the first time, what couples looked like when they were actually equals. When two people exchanged opinions freely, when a woman was allowed to simply be herself. She fell in love with Mike Stone. In early 1972, Priscilla told Elvis she was leaving. It was one of the bravest things she would ever do, and one of the most painful. Elvis reportedly wept. He begged her not to go. Years later, Priscilla would say she loved him till the end. But she also knew that staying would have erased her, that she would have vanished, slowly and completely, into the role he needed her to play. The divorce was finalized on October 9, 1973. They held hands during the proceedings. They remained friends. And that friendship, tender, complicated, the love that does not stop just because it cannot continue as it was, would sustain them both until August 16, 1977, when Priscilla's phone rang with news that made every other piece of difficult news in her life seem, by comparison, like a rehearsal. Elvis was dead. He was 42 years old. She stood in the wreckage of that moment and understood something that would take years to fully articulate. She had spent the most formative years of her life learning to love a man who was larger than life. And now that man was gone. And she was 32 years old. And the world still knew her only in relation to him. She had a daughter to raise. She had an estate hemorrhaging money. Graceland required $500,000 a year in maintenance costs. The Presley empire, at the time of Elvis's death, was worth barely $1 million. Every financial advisor she consulted told her the same thing: sell Graceland. Cut losses. Walk away. She did not walk away. This is who Priscilla Presley actually is. Not the dark-haired girl in the sailor dress. Not the wife in the wedding photographs with the impossible hair. The woman who looked at a crumbling financial empire and said no. Absolutely not. The woman who taught herself business from the ground up, who sat in boardrooms and asked relentless questions and made calculated, visionary decisions that every sophisticated man around her underestimated. In 1982, she opened Graceland to the public. The advisors thought she was delusional. Graceland drew over 600,000 visitors in its first year. By the time she stepped back from Elvis Presley Enterprises, the estate was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She built that, with no business degree, with no mentor, with nothing but the iron conviction that Elvis's legacy deserved better than liquidation, and the bone-deep stubbornness of a woman who had already survived losses that would have leveled most people. And then, remarkably, she found a life of her own. She joined the cast of Dallas in 1983, playing Jenna Wade, and discovered that she was a natural on camera, warm, precise, effortlessly compelling. The show ran for 5 years. Then came the Naked Gun franchise, 3 films alongside Leslie Nielsen, and the revelation that Priscilla Presley had a gift for comedy nobody had expected. She was funny. She was brilliant. She was, finally, herself. She had a son with her longtime partner Marco Garibaldi, Navarone, born in 1987, and though that relationship eventually ended too, she navigated it with the same quiet grace she brought to every chapter of her life that the public was not watching. But beneath the competence, beneath the performance of self-possession, the grief was never far from the surface. And the grief was not finished with her yet. In July 2020, Priscilla's grandson, Lisa Marie's beloved son Benjamin Keough, died by suicide. He was 27 years old, beautiful and troubled and adored by his entire family. Priscilla posted to social media with words that barely contained the depth of what she was holding. She wrote that the shock of losing Ben had penetrated her soul, that each day she woke up she prayed it would get better. Lisa Marie never recovered from Benjamin's death. She had always been wild, complicated, magnificent in her chaos. A child who arrived at Graceland as a little girl and had grown into a woman of ferocious emotional life. But the loss of her son hollowed her out. Friends and family saw it. Riley Keough, Lisa Marie's eldest daughter, would later say that her mother's final years were marked by a grief so total, so consuming, that it extinguished the will to keep living. On January 10, 2023, Priscilla and Lisa Marie attended the Golden Globe Awards together. They were both dressed beautifully. They laughed. They wore heels. And at some point on the way out, they both tripped on the same step and dissolved into giggles. It was the last time Priscilla would hear her daughter laugh. Lisa Marie complained of stomach pain. They hugged and said goodbye at the cars. Priscilla would later describe that hug to Piers Morgan. She said, "It was still shocking that we don't have her." On January 12, 2023, Lisa Marie Presley died. She was 54 years old. A small bowel obstruction, caused by scar tissue from previous bariatric surgery. Her death was sudden, devastating, and catastrophically unfair. It came 2 days after the Golden Globes. It came 2.5 years after Benjamin. It came when Priscilla had already been carrying more grief than any one life should contain. Priscilla said the loss was unbearable. She did not reach for softer language, because there was no softer language available. She had lost her mother. She had lost her grandson. And now she had lost her daughter. The child she had brought into the world in Memphis in 1968, the little girl who had grown up running wild through Graceland with no rules and too much freedom and an enormous, bruised heart. That child was gone. In her 2025 memoir, Softly, As I Leave You, Priscilla wrote about all of it. About Elvis. About the anxiety and the loneliness of Graceland. About the affair she suspected but could not prove. About the way she had loved him, still loves him, even now, through what she called a tender haze. She wrote about Lisa Marie. About the difficulty and the beauty of that mother-daughter bond. About Benjamin. About the strange, fractured silence that grief leaves behind. The way a family can start to drift when its center of gravity is gone. She wrote, at 80 years old, with the clarity of someone who has survived everything she was ever afraid of. And she wrote without self-pity. That is the thing about Priscilla Presley that the world has consistently failed to adequately honor. She does not perform suffering. She does not request sympathy. She carries what she carries with an uprightness that is not coldness, but is rather the particular posture of someone who understood early that no one was coming to save her, that whatever was going to be built was going to be built by her own two hands. She has always believed in something larger than herself. Her faith, never loudly declared but consistently present, has been the quiet thread running through every reinvention. In the aftermath of Elvis's death, when she knelt in the devastation of it, and somehow found the will to walk into a boardroom and fight for his legacy. In the aftermath of Benjamin's death, when she woke each morning and prayed. In the aftermath of Lisa Marie, when she stood up again because there was nothing else available to her but to stand up. She is 80 years old now. She has outlived a husband who seemed indestructible, a grandson who deserved more time, and a daughter who carried both of their names in her blood. She has built one of the most successful entertainment estates in American history. She has acted in films that made people laugh and remember her as something other than someone's wife. She has raised children through crises that would test any mother. She has written, honestly and without flinching, about the loves and losses that shaped her. And still, at the heart of all of it, still, in every interview, in every photograph, in the memoir she published at 80, there is that girl in the dark coat at the Rhine-Main airport, standing on the tarmac in the cold March air of 1960, waving goodbye to a plane that carried away the man who had chosen her. She is smiling. Her eyes are holding something back. She has never stopped being that girl. She has only, over the long arc of an extraordinary life, learned what the smile was protecting. So here is what I want to say to you, directly, as you sit watching this, with whatever losses you are carrying and whatever version of yourself you are still in the process of becoming. Priscilla Presley never got to be a normal 14-year-old. She never got to grow up in the slow, ordinary, forgettable way that the rest of us take for granted. She walked into a room in Bad Nauheim, Germany, in a white and navy sailor dress, and from that night forward her life was not entirely her own. She gave it willingly. She loved Elvis with everything she had. But there came a day, a hard, necessary, terrifying day, when she had to choose between who she was becoming and who someone else needed her to be. She chose herself. And it was not a clean or triumphant choice. It cost her. Relationships cost you. Grief costs you. The people you love who leave, through departure, through divorce, through death, they take pieces of you with them that you spend the rest of your life not exactly replacing, but learning to live without. Priscilla lost her father before she could say his name. She lost her marriage before she was ready. She lost her former husband before they could grow old. She lost her grandson. She lost her daughter. She woke up each time in the wreckage and decided, again, to build something. The girl in the dark coat at the airport is still there, Inside the 80-year-old woman who wrote an honest memoir and said the word unbearable out loud on international television. She is still there, holding something behind her eyes. But now, perhaps, what she is holding is not grief alone. Perhaps what she is holding now is the weight of everything she survived, everything she built, everyone she loved with her whole self, imperfectly and beautifully and without reservation. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it rather than answer it quickly. Is there something in your life that you have been carrying, not because you have to, but because love asked it of you, and you said yes? And is the version of yourself that said yes still the version of yourself that is showing up today? Because Priscilla Presley's life is not a cautionary tale, but it is a question, a long, honest, beautiful question about what we give, what we keep, and what we owe ourselves in the end. She stood on a tarmac in Germany in 1960 and waved goodbye with a smile that was not entirely a smile. She is still standing. She is still waving. And after everything, after all of it, she has not looked away. What about you?